a couple of banks, mostly fintech, before I then joined as a lead designer at IoT.next, and also a certified usability analyst from Human Factors International. You're welcome to ping me on LinkedIn as well. Always good to have a chat to people. So to solve the problem, I guess, at hand about how to improve your conversions on your website or to get more leads, we really kind of focused around kind of three things. Firstly, kind of identifying the problem areas, reviewing the information on those kind of problem areas, and then ideally how you can actually then improve on those elements itself. So those are really the three ways you would go about doing this. So finding problem areas are typically something that you need to do through data, right? And one of the main, I guess, data sources would be your Google Analytics. And what's beautiful about analytics is that they do obviously cater to the need for identifying those problem areas. They obviously have massive years of experience in dealing with that. But the one thing you need to kind of just try and remember to kind of teach yourself is to reconsider what you know to be true and allow yourself to learn from your users' behaviors. I think it's quite humbling sometimes when you think you know what is happening on your website and only to discover that something else completely differently is happening. So don't have these kind of preconceived ideas of exactly what you think is happening. Try and be humbled by your data. So my first protocol would be something along the lines of behavior flow reports on Google Analytics. It's hugely powerful. And it's visually quite rich and explains quite well what's happening. So you can see here, when you access the report, it gives you a breakdown of your most accessed pages to start with, and then it shows you the breakdown of the traffic that flows out of that page into the next page, for example. So in this example, they would show you that 28% of your, or 28%, 28 of the 103 users, so 21.4% out of the 78.6%, actually moved on. So that means you had a drop off of 78%, which is not ideal. So ideally, you want to try and like lessen that number of drop offs. You always want people to move on. And that's obviously one of the kind of conversion rate triggers or points that we kind of dial into. So just to note that you can actually get it through, if you go to behavior flow, and then that is the report you'll see. Like by default, obviously just choose your date range, etc. So if you had to kind of measure it month to month, like, you know, to kind of see if you actually made improvements, etc. This is the way you would go about doing that. So I think the first step is just look at these pages, like try and identify which pages you're looking at, and whether or not that's kind of the journey that you're trying to improve on, and then try and visualize it in a way for yourself that kind of, you know, it just makes it a bit more tangible, a bit more real. Kind of mock up that flow, put in the values there, and play around with this information. Sometimes you will kind of find that users will use your site in a way you never imagined or intended. And I think the intended part is often something that we get stuck on, right? We so often kind of have this idea of what you want users to do, and then they completely mess about with the way you wanted them to kind of use the site, especially on more complex kind of user journeys, etc. The next step I would then typically do is also go into Google, the rest of Google Analytics, and I would look at kind of time spent, for example. It's sometimes quite indicative of whether or not a page where people visit that they spend too little time with a high bounce rate. That would be an indication of kind of relevance. Just so you know, bounce rate, if you don't know, is obviously if a page is visited and the user did not engage any further. So they landed on a page and then they dropped off immediately without engaging the rest of your site. So again, you want to kind of look at something that has kind of a mean of a time spent with a reasonable bounce rate. So, but I'll go into that a bit more in terms of relevancy and all that kind of stuff. So short time spent, high bounce rate would show relevance is probably a problem. If someone is spending a long time on it, but still have a relatively high bounce rate, it probably means that the information you're looking at is probably hard to or difficult to consume. So I think a lot of the times people then ask me, well, what's a good bounce rate? Or what's a too short or too long a period of time? It differs from website, industry, purpose, all of those kind of things. So there's no real kind of golden thread in terms of bounce rates, etc. The only way you can really tell whether or not you have a good bounce rate or bad bounce rate is measuring against yourself. So it's always good to start somewhere, have a benchmark of any sorts, and then try and improve on those values. I think that is only compete against yourself. Don't try and compete against anyone else for that matter. And then in terms of bounce rates, look at your average and then look at how the page is relevant to your average bounce rate compares. So obviously a homepage, you want to try and get as low as possible, because essentially if anyone visits your homepage and they drop off, it means that none of the information that you displayed on your homepage was relevant to the user. On a particular article page, that would make more sense, right? If the content is not that relevant, that they might drop off. So, but again, we'll dig into that a little deeper. So the idea is really trying to get the users to move forward based on this information that you're seeing. So just kind of to look back, look at the kind of what are the obvious navigating patterns you can spot, what is repeatedly happening, try and get a sense of what's actually occurring on your website. Can you motivate or hypothesize why the users are following a navigation journey? Like just trying to think like, what's the reason for them dropping off on this particular page? Trying to be a bit more self-aware in terms of your website. And is the journey something that you want? In other words, the pattern that you're noticing, is it something that you want, or is it something that you want to change the behavior of? Is it something you want to actually channel them slightly differently? And that will help you to kind of define what your next steps might be. Something to just keep in mind, or two things to keep in mind when looking at kind of journey spotting or mapping, is that you have to understand that returning and new users may have different journeys, right? Someone that has been to your page before might have a less time spent on your homepage because they already know where they wanted to go. Or a new user might spend a little more time on your homepage. So it's important to maybe also just segment your audiences when looking at their data sets. And then the second thing is consider that mobile and desktop have different user journeys as well. I think the important bit here is to understand the use case for when accessing your website on mobile and when someone is accessing your website on desktop. Mobile, there's a typical pattern in terms of the way people access your information is maybe on the fly. They have 5 minutes to spare, that kind of. How many times have we not looked at your phone in a queue or something, or you just remembered like, oh, I need to do something, and you quickly go and check out that website. It's very circumstantial. So try and also segment that part of it in terms of your audiences. If you really want to kind of dig a little deeper, there are some amazing kind of user behavior software that allows you to kind of do session replays. In other words, you can actually see how a user used their mouse, where they clicked. It'll give you heat maps of how far they scrolled, what areas people tried to click on, or I don't know if you do it, but I do. Like you almost read with your cursor, and you can see where people are kind of focusing their time. And obviously, in most of these tools, they have more advanced funnels, etc. as well. All of this, in one way or another, is available in Google, but not maybe to the same extent. So is there anything that you guys want to know about the data part specifically? That this really is a lot more kind of, I know, Fadi's domain in terms of understanding and speciality and assessments and all that kind of stuff. So I'm happy to kind of get him to chime in here.
Jaco, just one note that in terms of looking at the pages is everybody's got limited resources.
Yes.
Like I know Fiona's got like 1 hour a month to change and update her website. So I just want to make a note in terms of you don't have to boil the ocean. You don't have to change all the pages. Just find, so when you look at your pages, and let's say you see a couple of pages with really poor bounce rates, look at the ones that actually get visitors, that gets a lot of visitors. So just look at your top 5 pages in terms of volume and which ones are good or bad. So don't go and improve all your pages on the website because very few people go there. Just find, like, look at the top 5 and identify 2 that suck and then unsuck them. You know.
And something I want to add to that, Fadi, is that this is not a one-off exercise. I think like people need to realize that this is something you should do on a monthly basis, or like it's a journey that you take continuously, and kind of refine and polish that kind of journey that you're looking at.
Cool.
I see there's a question from Grobli as well.
Papa?
Great, thanks guys. I just have a question with this whole thing. Like I've got clients that have very simple landing pages, like some of the campaigns we run a 1-page landing page because it's a quick lead campaign, but I've also got clients that have multi-sites. So for instance, one of them has 16 unique spas all on one site with subdomains. And how does that level, I mean, it's over 100 pages, this multi-site. So how would this tracking process need to be adapted for a major site like that?
I think in a scenario where if the landing pages are obviously, like, if I understand you correctly, it's one landing page, but you have the same landing page distributed across multiple spas, as an example, correct?
So yes, we've got, for instance, all the spas would be running the same promotion. So there's a central promotion page.
I understand.
But then once they click the promotion, they get redirected to a sub page and a sub mini site within, so that they go to the relevant spa. And it's a very complicated and, quite frankly, cock journey. But can this tracking be implemented across everything to show where things are falling over, or how do I need to adjust the tracking?
Yeah, I don't know if there's maybe a more advanced one.
Pippa, I'll jump on a call with you afterwards and just have a chat for it.
Cool, thanks.
All right. Fiona, you also had a question? No, not anymore. Okay.
And then Grobli asked if have we started using GA4 with the same behavior flow?
Okay, so I'll answer that. So everybody still has universal analytics, I know, and then in theory you should have GA4 already. You do get a user flow report inside Google Analytics 4. It's hidden away and it's a little bit complicated to use. What GA4 does have, which is absolutely amazing, it's got an engagement rate metric. So the bounce rate has gone away. So bounce rate is really good in Google Analytics 3 because you can see people that have left. But GA4 has got a new one called the engagement rate, which is way better. And I'm happy to share like how to use those reports. We'll take a note. Danae, will you just make a note to reach out to Grobli to just show him those two reports? Cool.
Sure.
Reinhard, you've raised your hand?
Yes, hello, Fadi. I just want to, I don't know if I'm jumping the gun here, but to your and Jaco's points, on the behavior flow, and you said identify a page that sucks and then unsuck it. How do you guys use the behavior flow to identify pages like that or that could be improved? And then how do you read that behavior flow that you opened the dialogue with?
Do you want to just go up to that slide, Jaco, and I'll talk through it? So right now, the most important thing is I'm exceptionally lazy. Let's just call it time efficient.
Yeah, me too. Lazy people find the easy way.
So when you load this report, so on the screen, Jaco, I don't know why, but your screen is landscaped on my machine. I hope nobody else has got that. Do you see that starting page? Do you see the second column? So that says starting page. that's usually your homepage. And so I usually look at the homepage and see how many people fall off there. So in his data, I can see there's a lot of people falling off there. So I'm like, I think the homepage needs a bit of attention.
Okay.
And then what I do is I go one column to the right and I just look at the top 3 pages there. And I see which ones are like the most important ones there. And that's usually where I start. And I just go and fix the homepage and see if I can improve that. And those three pages. And I can see if I improve. Because the reality is that most people enter there and then they go to the 2nd or 3rd or 4th page and then they leave. So ignore the column 4. Like people are just not, there's not a lot of volume there.
Okay.
So just focus on like the main flow of how people move through the site.
And improve that.
So for example, one of the things we've seen with our site is people go to the home page and they go to About Us page. So we've realized that people are like, who the hell are these dudes? And that's like a big journey. So we've identified that. So then we work on the About Us page.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, 100%.
Okay. Don?
What if you have one of those endless scroll sites that just like that is your page?
So no, that's a good question. Then the heat mapping software, that's NightJarr and Crazy Egg, that's the only thing that you can use because people aren't moving between pages, so Google Analytics can't see that. So if you install NightJarr, it's going to show you the depth that they've scrolled and where they've clicked as well, and then you can get a sense of like what's happening on the page. Okay, Google Analytics 4 can show you how far people have scrolled. So Google Analytics 4 is a little bit better, but I would rather just use Crazy Egg. Okay, Anton, you have a question.
Yeah, just a quick question. Sorry, I joined late, and I used to use NightJarr many years ago, and we decided not to use it anymore because of the extra load, and it just slowed down all of the sites that we ran it on. And that was the period when you could still see some visual tracking on Google Analytics. I don't know if you can remember that. It was a couple of years ago, you could see those visual tracking. But you can still see it, via one of the Chrome plugins, not as detailed as NightJarr, which records the user's session on their browsing behavior. But my question actually is, does it still add or create a lot of extra, how can I say, does it slow down your page where you actually run it on? That's the question, because I mean, if you test it and use it for testing the funnel and your whole process, I mean, it's not going to work because it's slowing down the whole process.
So I think that the debate that the website owner has to have is, are they okay with a slight decrease in the speed of the site compared with the insights that they're going to get from it? What I do think is to run it, but then to switch it off if you're not using it, because there is a speed impact. But I think that's a question for each website owner: is speed and usability and SEO more important, or getting the insights from the software? And I think that's an individual decision.
Thank you.
Cool. We've got a question here. Would you say it's beneficial to have an endless scroll page, or should it be adapted? Yaku, that's a good question.
Again, I don't think there's a silver bullet for something like that. It really depends on what you're trying to achieve. If you're trying to have a single message that you're trying to communicate and then to try and convert, a single page is useful. But if you have quite a number of topics that you're trying to communicate and that you need to kind of unpack it more, ideally I would navigate away and allow kind of more content breakups to happen further down the journey.
Okay. So Robbie has also made a point that if you do have a one-page scroller, install Google Analytics 4. It's way better than Google Analytics 3 in terms of measurement and scroll depth, etc., because there's events that fires.
Cool.
All right. Cool. Jaco, I think you can continue.
Thanks. So yeah, now that we have the data, I really do enjoy making it easier to consume. I really do feel like embedding yourself in different ways allows you to kind of have a different perspective. So one of the ways that I try and do this or achieve this is by creating kind of a journey phases. And my sidekicks can drop you a link in the chat. I use Miro specifically. You can actually have a free page or whatever, and they have a ton of templates that allow you to kind of do this and dump stuff. It's like this massive canvas that you can just play with. You can drop in any photos, you can create little flow diagrams, etc. But I find this, and if you Google this as well, you'll find like a wealth of knowledge around journey mapping. And the idea here is to kind of deep dive into just what you think could potentially be the issue. And even if you don't have the right information on hand, make assumptions, prove yourself wrong at some point, but start somewhere, because I think just always being not in the know is also not ideal. So being completely ignorant to it is not helping anyone. So what this journey map is allowing you to do is kind of look at the jobs to be done. So you have this kind of journey, you look at the jobs to be done. So what are the tasks that the user can perform? Create the context and touch points. So what part of the service are they wanting to interact with? What are the gains for the user? So what is the user's motivation or benefits to performing this task? And what are the pain points? So like what would stop or hinder the user from actually moving forward in your journey? And then emotion. And this is something that I think people forget, is that a user is not just like this kind of emotionless entity at the end of the day. There's some apprehensiveness or excitedness or stressed outness, like any issues that the user might actually, experience. If you think about any buying journey, or any kind of more kind of like larger commitment a user needs to make, there's a certain amount of angst that you need to kind of deal with. And it's something that you can actually start plotting. So like at what point is the user excited or not? So what this allows you to do and reflect on is like, are you sure you're giving the user what they need in order to commit? Are you giving them the right information? Are you giving them the right amount of like comfort to kind of commit? Like, are you kind of telling them that you're not going to spam them, or like how are they going to commit to what you ask them to do without creating that kind of anxiety that they might experience? So one of the things that we, for example, do is like when we say to people that they can register online, we give them a reason, and we also tell them that it's free. So like registering doesn't come with like unknowns in the journey. So we try and like kind of explain to them on the road there, like why it's okay, why they should be able to commit. So when you kind of embed yourself in this kind of journey, it really does help you to better empathize with your user. And that's really what you need to try and do over time, is really kind of understand it from their perspective.
Jaco, can I just stop?
Yes.
Just stop you there. Is 90% of the sites that we see is about us. Like we create our sites, our services. It's like our awards, and a lot of times when we get asked the questions like how do I unsuck my website or like make it better, is to say your website isn't for you.
Yeah.
Like nobody cares about you. Just get that. Just understand that part.
I think it's like for me, it's about like if you're gonna have to have a conversation with someone about your company, right? Are you gonna just like run around with a bunch of trophies and like like boastfulness about like, yes, there's a certain amount of like credibility that you're trying to build up, but you're not going to be arrogant about it. There's a certain amount of kind of humility that you need to take in approaching the user as well. Like imagine you're actually sitting in front of them, talking to them, saying what you want to say. Yeah. Don just dropped a little chat, a nugget there, I guess, as well, like a book. I'll go and, yeah. But yeah, so I think for me, that's always been quite interesting when people like just want to show off, but it's really about the engagement part. And it's kind of a bit of a turn off when people are like too kind of, self-gloating. So just up to this point, like, if we reflect, the more you work with your data, the better you'll get to understand what's happening and better empathize with the users. Look at things more holistically. Find different ways to visualize and consume the information that you have available to you. And then when you don't have data, start somewhere. Use a baseline. Make assumptions in the meanwhile until you prove yourself otherwise. I think it's important to just get that out there as well, because sometimes people are debilitated by the fact they don't have any information. Start somewhere. Otherwise, you're just never going to get there. So now that we've kind of identified some of the problem areas, the next step would be to really look at the actual pages themselves. Like what, if we talk about content engagement and like how people actually work with information you have on screen, and how do you then reduce the bounce rates? So like I mentioned, we have the data. Now let's focus on the actual screens themselves. And one of the ways that I do that is by actually, on the Mac, I've got a little tool called Paparazzi. And what it does, it actually captures the entire screen for me. So like screen grab it for me. And I found actually 1 or 2 other websites that would do the same thing. And again, Miro is a great tool where once you've kind of done your screen grabs, go and dump those screen grabs inside Miro and look at your screen side by side. And one of the kind of reasons I do this, and I'm using NightJarr's website because we know we've made some horrible mistakes and we're in the process of fixing it. But, look for design inconsistencies on your pages. Like what might trigger a user to not like the website? Maybe there's like an inconsistent experience that we're giving them. Maybe it's something that they expect, maybe a call to action at the top of each page, and we're not giving it to them. Like there are certain things that we need to look at that could be triggering to users. And what are those? The other thing to look at on a page specifically, if you guys are talking about those long one pages, is are we kind of being too aggressive or too conservative with the buttons and colors on the page? And I'll go into the button conversation a little later, but it's something to also consider. Like, are you giving the user the right amount of conversion points? Are you giving them enough information and then the ability to then move on? And this is particularly important with kind of more critical conversions. So especially on a buy now or add to cart kind of scenario, commitment on those pages is important. So like, how do you create focus on a page like that? So this is a kettle I'm really keen on buying, but I also looked otherwise for places that might be cheaper, but it's going to be a lot harder to identify that conversion point when you have like 1, 2, 3 button looking elements of the same color. Like it's not ideal. And then you have this massive logo area to compete with. And I can understand why they've done all of this, right? They in their minds, they're probably like, oh, this is important. Oh, that's important. Oh, it's important to like show all the brands. But at some point, you have to prioritize your importance as well, right? Like, what is the most, one of my mentors before always told me is like, look at the page and what is the number 1 job of this page? And if the number 1 job is to add to cart, then make that the most important element on that screen. And that was
sorry, Yaku. We've got a question here from Papa. Are floating inquiry buttons as effective as they are claimed to be, or would a form on the left-hand side of the page be better?
I think, if I may, I don't know. I think you probably need to look at, again, maybe the scenario that you're looking at, and then maybe look at some, and I'll show you guys a neat little trick, is look at some patterns that might exist already. So material guidelines, for example, have something called the floating action button, the FAB, and they have huge write-ups about how to use it, when to not use it, all those kind of things. So there are like a ton of literature and resources out there to answer that question. I just don't know offhand. I'll probably go and look at it when I'm in that scenario. But yeah, I think maybe in some ways I would probably think that if the only conversion point is the form, then potentially, but I think it's, but then you're creating this kind of maybe distraction from the content. So yeah, it's like it's hard to answer that offhand. Unfortunately, sorry. I'm going to be the first person to tell you that I don't know. Like I've got this like confidence meter, and if it's below a certain marker, I'm just going to tell you like, sorry, it's like I can't answer you confidently. This is one of those scenarios, I suppose. So I think with that in mind, why do users bounce digitally, not literally? And like maybe then, Fadi, what did you call it on GA4?
Oh, the engagement rate.
Yes. So I guess bounce is probably going to be less effective going forward. But yeah, if we look at the reasons for the engagement rate not being well, I suppose there are a couple of reasons for that. The top ones I would imagine, or that I've kind of distilled it down to, was expectation mismatch. Does the page deliver on what I wanted to kind of deliver on? Organic search irrelevance. Sometimes Google gets it wrong, or maybe your phrasing is wrong when you actually search for something, and that might return a result that is less relevant to the user. Unappealing website. Now, again, this is something that you could also argue as desktop and mobile. You need to consider that those two form factors may have very different experiences, and that could yield like an unappealing website, so to speak. A lack of call to action. If the user gets the content, but there's no way for them to kind of move on, that's also a failure point. And too many options is like that, choice paralysis. If there's just too much going on, the user might just kind of abandon and try and find the next one that actually has a more focused kind of journey.
I have a practical story about those too many options thing. And everybody has probably been to a market, and there's always a Tannie that sells jam, right? There's always one selling jam. And what happens is you walk past this Tannie selling jam, but she's got 18 different jams sitting there. And then she's like, you have to try this jam. And I'm like, I can't choose between 18 different jams. And then I just walk away because it's the cognitive load and the effort to choose is just too much. And this is the exact same thing. So if that Tannie had one pecan nut jam or one raspberry jam, I would go, cool, I'll try it. But I can't deal with 18. It's just too much.
So the number one reason is content. And often, like, especially when people ask me to help them with their website, I say to them, like, do you have the copy ready? Like, do you have the content handy? And they're like, no, it's fine. They'll just do it, like, And I'm like, no, the website, the building of the website is almost the easiest part of the entire journey. Getting your copy right is arguably the hardest thing on getting right on the website. And I found a neat little study that kind of will kind of explain my point here. So the Nielsen Norman Group, they are really like the forefathers of UX, conducted a study where they looked at how people are reading websites, and 79% of their test users always scanned any new page. Only 16% of the people would read the pages word by word. You might find that there's a demographic element here as well. And I think the younger the people get, the less word by word people you'll find. But an even newer study then found that people read email newsletters even less, so or more kind of scanning more. So one of the things that kind of this that they then tried to assess it with, they've kind of slimmed it down to these kind of 4 points: is how quick were people able to kind of consume the information, the number of reading errors and understanding they made or had of the content that they consumed, were they able to kind of recall the information that they saw, and did they understand the structure of the information that they see, that they viewed. So they have this kind of control copy of this kind of promotional information, and they called it using marketees kind of talk. It's like kind of marketing, very brochure-like content. So I'm going to just read this one, and then the rest I'm not going to read, but you can see it in your own time. So Nebraska is filled with internationally recognized attractions that drew large crowds of people every year without fail. In 1996, some of the most popular places were Fort Robertson State Park, 350,000 visitors, Scotts Bluff National Monument, 132,166, Arbor Lodge State Historical Park and Museum, 100,000, Carhenge, 86,598, Stir Museum. Okay, anyway, you get the point. There's a lot of information there, and they use this as the control copy. And then what they did is they actually rewrote this content in 3 or 4 different manners to see how they could improve on the way people were then kind of measured on, right? The time, errors, memory, and site structure. So the first thing they did was just made it more concise. So you can see they took out the numbers, they got more to the point, and they have about half the word count. Just in that, they improved the actual copy reading by 58%. Now, they didn't stop there. They then went on to go, okay, cool. What if we made the information slightly more scannable? So they took the same copy again. They've introduced back those kind of markety words. You can see even the values are back. But just making it the last part more structured, they allowed the user to be able to scan the kind of different areas that were visited, most popular places. And just that then created a 47% improvement in consumption. Then they wrote it in objective language. So it was more neutral, typically something that you would find in, say, a news type written article. So less, you'll see the every year popular, all that kind of stuff. So like they took out that kind of very descriptive words and just made it slightly more objective. That improved it on 27%. Combined, they took all of the kind of writing styles and then came up with this copy, and it had an improvement of 124% over the control content that they had. So you can imagine that if you had to review your product information, your About Us information, your homepage copy, or your services pages, all with this kind of same lens, how more effective would users be able to kind of consume the information that they're looking at? So one of the things that they did kind of then distilled it down to was that they think that the kind of promotional language imposes a cognitive burden. So I don't know about you, but like I've got limited bandwidth when I kind of read or, you know, otherwise. And I can imagine that it's overloading you with information that's probably kind of very, like not useful in this situation, especially if you kind of dumbing it down to what the information is about, what the user is probably looking at. We applied some of that same thinking in some of our services pages initially. And what we did is we kind of looked at just making it slightly more scannable, but breaking up the content pieces, giving it a bit more negative space. And then also, you know, trying to kind of make some of this, the actual solution elements bulleted. And in the hopes that obviously that users would be able to kind of improve on what they've consumed.
Jaco, Papa has just asked a question. Yeah, Papa.
Yes.
Sorry for my endless questions. I was just, with that example specifically, there's a lot of data that you're trying to portray. Would it not be, I'm not sure if it was measured, it doesn't seem to be, but wouldn't it have been better to have some concise marketees type copy so that for SEO purposes, but then actual visualization of the visitor rate rather than the numbers? So a graph or a heat map or something. Because from what I've read, your youngsters tend to look at pictures, not words.
I think what this is telling us is to not copy and paste your brochure information. And I think that's often what is happening, right? People write, like have this kind of write-up of what they're trying to communicate, and then they would copy and paste that onto a website. There are ways of visualizing it better. And maybe include a bit of personality. I'm not arguing that we should like sterilize absolutely everything. I think what it is telling us is to be a bit more conservative with that kind of marketing speak and being too verbose when trying to communicate something. So I think it's more of an awareness thing that we need to kind of be looking at than completely sterilizing everything that we put a place online. Otherwise, it'll be an incredibly boring space.
So Jaco, this data, just to bring it back to like the topic, the big overarching topic in terms of increasing sales online.
Yes.
So what you're almost saying is stop the verbose marketing speak and just give people the information they need objectively to make a decision on their own.
Yes, and well, actually, what could work often, right, is just give the initial part to the user. If they then want to dig deeper, there's always an opportunity for them to read more or to expand on that. So product information. So if you have to write like literally a paragraph of what this product is about or what the service is about, give them that part. If they then want to delve into what the information is that you have available, then give them that, but it's creating that opportunity to do that. Okay. And Pepper Joe, just for interest sake, it can be on the same page. It doesn't have to be like another page necessarily, but just reduce that kind of overhead initially. So inherently what it means that content engagement improvements will reduce a bounce rate. And I guess content engagement improvement is really what GA4 is aiming for. So they've probably then just summarized it into a single upwards kind of trend. So if we just kind of reflect on the other considerations to improve your actual page information, there's something called information architecture. Make sure it's logical and prioritized. I'll briefly touch on it, but I mean, information architecture can really kind of have an entire presentation on its own. It's massive, but it's hugely important. So if you don't know anything about that, please go and check it out. Ensure content is readable and easy to consume, like I mentioned now, and then test your content on desktop and mobile devices. Not everything needs to be on both environments, and your user journeys should be able to also reflect that if you look at those properly.
Jaco, just stop.
Yes.
Just go back one. So Jaco, we don't have time to go into the details of those three. Yes. We still need to cover the call to action buttons. Is there any questions around content and the structuring of content that Jaco has spoken about? Cool. No questions. Cool. Okay. All right, Jaco. So in terms of the call to action section, so we have about 5 minutes left to talk about that, and then we're going to stop and do some quick Q&A stuff. So I think just go to the short, verbose, clear slides that'll add value in terms of helping them convert their customers into leads.
Cool. So yeah, I mean the improving pathways, the call to actions really comes down to like what does a button look like. And it's less about, like, often people is like, what's the best color? I think it's less about that and more about other things. So placement, structure, and size is really important. And placement, to start with, is just, if you get back to that, taking that high level view of your page, place those buttons and look at them again. So if you go back to these kind of pages, see whether or not you've effectively placed the actual buttons within the user's ability to kind of scan down the page. And like I mentioned earlier, there are massive amounts of resources out there that kind of speaks to placement and structure and anatomy and hierarchy of buttons. One example of that is material guidelines. It's Google's library of all the app design and web design that they have online. They don't necessarily always follow it 100%, but it's a huge resource. Others that I can think of that are great references are IBM has quite a good one. Uber has a very good guideline. You can think of it as like the CI guidelines, but more kind of focused around the user experience design and the user interface design properties. And they have motivations. They even tell you what not to do which is sometimes actually a lot more useful than just showing you what to do. And they even motivate why you shouldn't be doing certain things. Another thing to consider is just size. Please don't make your buttons too small. There's actually like a 66-year-old law that still applies called Fitts law. It's like the synopsis of it is the time to reach the target depends on the distance to the target and its size. And that's one of the reasons, if you ever wondered why buttons are placed at the top left-hand or bottom left-hand or right-hand corners, is because your mouse would stop there. So like if you have to kind of close or minimize or maximize your windows, it's a reason why it's placed top left, because your cursor would actually stop there. Obviously, we moved into the kind of touch era. So I guess it's just a pattern that continued, because then we actually created expectation of where buttons should live and not. And the last thing I want to just touch on again is, like, please make a button look, act, and respond like a button. But then please also consider the copy for that button. And OK is not a good copy for that button. Just to briefly touch on copy on buttons. There's a ton of literature out there about microcopy and call to action copy. But just to kind of look at this briefly, this is an example in Dropbox, for example, where they would have create file in, and then you had to have your folder list, and then they repeat the actual verb as to what you're about to do, and that helps the user to kind of create intent and purpose, so they know what to look for when they want to kind of create a file in something, and then have the command to actually execute that command. This is also important on critical conversion pages. So like add to cart. If a user needs to add something to the cart, add it to the cart. If someone has to publish something to a place, then make it a publish, But careful that you don't use words that create ambiguity, right? So if you want to remove something from a list, and you want to, don't add the word, say, delete, because delete could mean that you're not just removing it from a list, but you removing it completely. So like, do consider creating unambiguous terms when you're trying to get a user to move on or do something specifically in the next step. So again, just to recap, so like find the problem areas, dig through analytics, review the pages at fault, assess your pages from a different perspective, really play around with the information that you have at hand, and then improve your pathways. Make sure you have good looking buttons and that you've looked at the content as a whole. This presentation and video will be made available after the session. And with that, we have all the links and additional resources at your disposal. So yeah.
Cool. Any questions? Nice.
Papa.
Sorry. Okay, last one, I swear. With the call to action buttons,
Yes.
Is there like a rule of thumb that says no more than, say, 3 on a page?
I think what's important to consider is not necessarily the number of buttons on a page, but are they placed within the same viewport? So, for example, if you have a piece of content, okay, if I go to an example.
You had that nice one with the multiple on different spaces.
So this one, for example, yeah. So you'll see that we try and like limit the number of buttons within a specified viewport. And when I call viewport, is like if I scroll through this page, I should really only be able to see that part of it, right?
Yeah.
That then creates a focus point. The same with the header button, etc. So it's less about, and you'll see here, I've created some hierarchy in terms of what I want you to do versus what you can do further on. So that's how you then do the third or second or third button. But that also speaks to what you see here, right? With a primary button, secondary button, and tertiary button. And sometimes all 3 of those are within view, but you create like high contrasting buttons versus less contrast versus less visual kind of affordance. So that would be your least prioritized action that you're trying to create. So yes, but again, it also depends on what your point or purpose would be.
And is there anything in terms of, like, is there any risk if you want to test that, like on page 1, we put the button towards the top, but page 2, we have it somewhere else to see and change it to see where it gets the most action?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess some A/B testing would be useful to try and determine that. Again, I think if you had enough people going through a particular page or something, play around. You will only know once you've started playing around with this kind of stuff and tested with your audience, etc., within your specified use case. So what I would suggest typically is follow the best practices, and then following that, you try and test it with users.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. This has been amazingly helpful.
Cool. No problem.
Anybody else? Raina?
Hi, I just wanted to know from, obviously you have your blog pages, etc. So that kind of content's changing all the time. But yeah, I love the thing of a consumer journey and having on your homepage, like content that is, you know, showcasing the ROI. So how often would that need to change? And I guess I'd probably get, I'm answering my own question, probably get that from the data of how many people are jumping on our website every month or so.
Yeah, I mean, so is the question, how often would you expect to change the homepage?
Yeah.
Okay. I guess if your value proposition remains the same, that there shouldn't be really a reason to change it. And I mean, I don't know what the implication of SEO would be necessarily, Fadi, but I guess with company information, there's no real danger in making it slightly more static. So yeah, I think what is important, obviously, you have your dynamic content, so your blogs and those kind of things could recycle on the homepage. Yeah.
Great. And then one quick question, just about metadata. It is very important, obviously, and you got to just keep that hygiene up to scratch all the time. Yeah.
Raina, let me wrap up and then I'll answer your question afterwards.
Sure.
So what we're going to do is we're going to wrap up. Yaku, thank you very much for the session. I think it's from the people staying, I think that it showed that people found value from it. You're welcome to email me if you have any questions. I've posted my email address in the thing. We focus more on the analytics part of all of this and UX stuff to find like what people are doing and where they're dropping off. So welcome to email me. You're welcome to stay on the call. So we're gonna stop the recording in a minute, but stay on the call. Like Raina, stay on the call and I'll answer your question. Or if anybody else has got a question and a bit camera shy, just stay and we can talk through like any of the any specific questions. All right. Cool. Thanks for joining, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks, Fadi. Thanks, Yaku. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Well done, guys.
Bye-bye.
That was awesome.
Thanks, buddy. Cheers.